Hello, writers, and welcome to the Author Burnout Coach, the show where we put the publishing industry and all sorts of societal messaging under a microscope. I'm your host, Isabel Sterling, YA author and certified life coach. In each episode, I offer you specific steps that you can take to break up with burnout and reclaim your love of stories. I'm on a mission to dismantle the bookish hustle culture, one writer at a time. I hope you'll join me. Hey writers, welcome to episode 17. As you heard in the intro, I'm on a mission to dismantle burnout and hustle culture in the book industry. And a question that often comes up, as it does with dismantling any institutionalized issue, is whose responsibility is it to actually make the change? Is it on the individual writers, to fix our mindsets and all of that? Or is it up to the publishing industry as a whole to make some more systemic changes? And the problem with this question is that it forces a false choice. It isn't a matter of this or that. It's all about that and, baby. There are definitely issues that exist on a systemic level within publishing that, if those were to change, would definitely decrease burnout for writers and editors and agents and everyone involved in the process. But that's not the whole story. If it were, burnout levels would be consistent from writer to writer. And while burnout is definitely a problem for, I would say, most of us, there are individual things that we can do to either increase or decrease our personal levels of burnout. But we are going to actually look at the industry as a whole first, because there are lots of things in this industry that can be very stressful for writers. And while yes, our thoughts are what make us feel frustrated or lead us to burnout, there are still common triggers in publishing that make it really easy to think thoughts that cause that level of frustration or worry. And there is way more than I could possibly include in one episode. I was joking with a friend that we could literally have an entire podcast series called What the Fuck Publishing about all the weird things that this industry does, but we'll stay focused and we'll start with just contracts and finances. Of course, I'm not going to get into all of the specifics, as contracts can vary from house to house, by the size of the publisher, or by, the fanciness of the author. Once you've gotten a certain sales record or awards, you tend to have a little more wiggle room on some of the contract terms, although not as much as you'd think outside of perhaps sort of the big major household names. Even so, there are some commonalities, things like stagnant advance sizes, advances being split into more and more and more segments. And sometimes there are really ridiculously overly broad non-compete clauses that really limit your ability to sell more work. And beyond contents of the contract, they can also just take for fucking ever to get finalized. It is not at all uncommon to be waiting on a contract for 3 to 6 months. It's also not uncommon. So with contracts being split, you get a portion on signing, a portion on the completion of the edits of the book, and a portion on publication of the book. Of course, this was the sort of norm pre-pandemic, and for my friends who have sold sort of since the pandemic, we are now seeing a lot of split into fourths and fifths, which is just asinine, but I digress. But it's not uncommon for somebody to have their edits done before they ever even get the contract, so they end up getting their 2 payments at once because it just took so damn long. And foreign rights, I will also just say, are a slightly different beast. They tend to take even longer, but I'm currently waiting on a contract for a foreign rights deal that was made over a year ago for a book that hit shelves more than 5 months ago. Now, of course, this is not at all the shade on the publisher. Loved working with them. And everyone is so overworked and busy and just all of the things. But it can certainly be a source of stress when you get a book deal and you can't reliably estimate when that money might come in, especially when you're supposed to get, in this case, I was supposed to get half on signing and half when the book came out. And now we're 5 months after the book being out and there's still no money. And again, no shade on the publisher. This is not a one publisher issue. This is just sort of endemic of how publishing seems to work. It's something that can be really easy to get stressed about, especially if you don't know how to manage your mind about it. So again, speaking of, advances being split up into multiple parts, typically a part of that is the edits being done on the book. And of course, this isn't super uncommon when it comes to contract work in general. I think about if you hire a contractor to do something, like I'm thinking about, I had a fence put up in our yard a year or so ago for our doggies. We pay half up front and then half when the work is done. But in publishing, you as the writer are not the only person responsible for getting things done. So if your editor, who also because of the systemic issues in publishing is also likely burnt out and exhausted and all of that, if that person is weeks or months late getting notes back to you, that then delays your ability to finish the book and get paid. Now, these kinds of delays, and actually before I even get into that, I just really want to acknowledge like how stressful that can be of you always, especially if you're somebody who always hits your deadlines and you're expecting, okay, with the deadline schedule, I should be able to get this done by this date and get paid. Perfect, that'll cover whatever big bill that's coming up. And then your editor is 2 or 3 months late getting notes back to you. Like that can totally fuck up your financial situation. And it's just sort of like, oops, oh well. And again, no shade on editors because they are also burnt out. They are also being affected by this systemic problem. We're working on short staffs and there's too much work for each person. And like, of course, lots of stuff. But when you combine those types of delays with the sort of low or stagnant advance sizes, which of course disproportionately affects BIPOC writers and other marginalized groups due to the interplay of systemic racism and homophobia and all sorts of unconscious bias, and these advances that are getting split into more and more parts, this will often lead writers to taking on more work than they would normally want to do or can comfortably handle in an effort to create some sense of financial security, which of course is part of what can lead to burnout. And when you add all of that to a lack of healthcare and other benefits that would come from a more traditional employment, publishing can really trigger your financial anxieties. Now, of course, publishing isn't alone in the whole overworking employees and pushing contract workers to the brink. A lot of this isn't so much a publishing problem as it is a toxic capitalism problem that puts the short-term profit over sustainable business practices. So they're chasing the dollars and the profit margins rather than actually investing and supporting the humans who actually do the day-to-day work of keeping said business running. But that could be a podcast for a whole other day, whole other podcast, in fact. So are there things that the heads of publishing could restructure how things are done and then reduce burnout? Things like more equitable advances, more equitable marketing budgets, hiring more staff and paying them better so editors and publicity and all the sales folks and everybody isn't so overwhelmed and behind on their work because they have too much work to do and then they're leaving the industry in droves? Absolutely. Publishing could definitely make those changes. And I do say, when I say publishing, I also don't specifically mean like the editors. I'm talking the people who have the highest level of decision making. There's a lot of wonderful people in publishing who are just sort of trapped in a system that doesn't work. Now, there's probably even more interesting and creative changes that could be made, like I don't even know, creating maybe opportunities for salaried writing positions, or maybe creating some sort of way for writers to all band together to be part of a health insurance plan. But I'll admit that that is beyond my current knowledge and expertise to say what's a good idea or not. And also, we would never all agree on what's the best idea because we're humans and we have different opinions. And as much as it would be amazing for the major publishers to make some of these big changes, they're frankly unlikely to do it on their own, especially when there are thousands of writers who our society is sort of conditioned to be willing to work themselves into the ground for the chance to achieve their dream of publishing a novel. And also, this industry has so successfully convinced so many of us that we need to just be grateful for whatever we get and never do anything to jeopardize our standing with our publisher, which so many of us, especially on our first couple of books, interpret to mean never rocking the boat, never asking for a deadline extension, and saying yes to every opportunity out of the fear of missing the one thing that might help our book succeed. And of course, this isn't to say that we should be quote unquote unprofessional or not take what we do seriously, but also like we write the books, we create the stories. Without writers, there is no publishing. And we are so conditioned to feel like we don't matter in the sort of grand scheme of the publishing machine. And I call bullshit. Without writers, there are no stories. So I will not get on that soapbox for too long. I will keep us focused. When we think about wanting to make these sort of bigger changes to publishing, the thing is, it's nearly impossible to advocate for those changes for any prolonged period of time when we are all fucking exhausted and just trying to meet deadlines so we can get paid and cover our bills. I know I think about groups like We Need Diverse Books and the work that they have done over years to help increase the percentage of BIPOC authors in this industry. And yet, with all those years of work and with the sort of structure that they have, I believe they're set up as a nonprofit now. Don't quote me. But they've put years of work into this, and the numbers still are really disproportionate to the general population. It is just, it takes a lot of work to make change. And we can't do it if we're exhausted. So this is where the and comes in. For some people, thinking about publishing business practices just leads to stress and anxiety and inaction. And it can actually make burnout worse if we believe that we're unable to do anything to change it or make it better. That might lead to feelings of hopelessness or feeling resigned or defeated. That is why for me, I have put my primary focus both in this podcast and with my one-on-one coaching clients to shift the focus on what we can do as individuals to reduce and eventually eradicate our own burnout, no matter what's happening in publishing. Because when we can do that, then we have the energy and the emotional and mental resources to push for that bigger change. Now, before I get into what we can do to reduce our own personal burnout, which also is basically what this entire podcast is about, so any episodes basically covers this, I do want to note that by focusing on individuals and what we can do to help ourselves, I am not letting publishing off the hook. It is not either or, it's both and. We cannot control what publishing does. We just can't. We can't really control what anybody else does. Every human has their own agency to make their own decisions. But we can control how we think about our writing, our careers, and our interaction with the book world, and that can change how we think and what we're able to do. So we can do things like ask for a deadline extension when we need them. We can stop telling ourselves we have to do anything. We can say we get to or we choose to. We can say that we're willing to put in some late nights for a short period of time to meet a goal instead of I have to give up my social life. We can do things like ask for a deadline extension without feeling guilty or ashamed about it. And also because half the time, maybe not half the time, but definitely some of the times, even if you hit your deadline, your editor may not even be able to look at the book for like 4 weeks. So why push yourself to get something done when they won't even look at it? Like, use the time. And part of that is having that communication and being willing to have the conversation. We can also stop telling ourselves that we have to do anything. Be honest. You don't have to write a book. You don't have to be a published author. You want to. You choose to. You get to work on your books. Just say that you're willing to do that. And then be honest about what you're willing to do. Are you willing to say, you know what? I am going to be okay with the pushback from my publisher, if I get any, about wanting an extension, but I'm going to take it anyways because I choose to be a writer and I choose to do it in a way that feels sustainable. You can do that. That is an option. It may not feel like an option, but it is an option. And also we can be honest about how much of our writing time that we lose to things like social media or just stressing about it or going down the spiral of, oh my goodness, what's going to happen if? And we can figure out how to deal with that stuff so we can actually get that writing time back. We can practice saying no to quote unquote opportunities that we're not actually excited about to make room for what we want to do. Like one of the things is we've had some suggestions as writers that as authors that we get on TikTok. And that was a huge fuck no for me. No, thank you. Do not want. I'm not going to spend my time on that because I know I have limited time and I want to spend it on my books and I want to spend it helping the writing community by doing this podcast and coaching my clients. I'm not going to figure out TikTok. I'm just not. And that's okay. I'm willing, if people want to be disappointed about that, that's fine. I'm willing to take that on. I'm okay with that. Just be honest with yourself about what you're willing to do. I'm not going to sit here and berate myself. Oh, I'm such a bad writer because I'm not on TikTok. My books aren't going to sell because I'm not on TikTok. I'm not going to do that to myself. I've made a decision and I'm good with it. And that is such a beautiful skill. And I'll have to do a podcast maybe on that of how to make a decision and just own it, because you lose so much more time berating yourself into trying to do the things you don't want to do. Cut that shit out. And kind of on that, like, stop telling ourselves that we have to learn the latest social media platform or we have to do this or we have to do that. Just own it. I'm choosing not to invest that time right now. I love that. I'm choosing not to do blank right now. Leaves you open to do it in the future if you want. Hell, in 6 months, maybe I will be on TikTok because I have more time in my life and it sounds fun. But right now, it's a hell no. And that's okay. Other things we can do for burnout is we can talk to ourselves with compassion on the days that we don't write as much as we'd hoped and celebrate the fuck out of ourselves on the days that we do. You know, recently I've mentioned my spouse was in a car accident. That week I wrote a lot less than I would normally want to, but I have compassion for that. I showed up for my spouse in the way that I wanted to. I also did write one day. I think I got like 100 words while I was sitting in the hospital while my spouse was taking a nap and resting and recovering. And I celebrated those 150 words. I celebrated them because I'm not going to say, oh, I didn't write 1,000 words. No, I wrote because it felt good and there was nothing else to do. And I was just sitting there watching my spouse sleep, which is not the most entertaining thing in the world. So celebrate, friends. If you don't know how to celebrate, go back and watch my Cause and Cure of Imposter Syndrome. The cure for imposter syndrome is celebrating. Celebrate yourself. It's not optional. And when we do all of these things, when we shift our internal narrative to create more joy and fun in our writing lives, and we reduce our level of burnout by letting go of all the bullshit shoulds we tell ourselves, we become an example of what is possible for other writers. And as we do that, we can start to create a culture where writers aren't so fucking exhausted all the time. When we have that extra energy, we can, if we want to, start to create sustainable ways to push and advocate for change on that systemic level. So final thoughts for the episode. If the idea of trying to fix publishing stresses you out, I want you to make a list of all the things you can control in your own writing life. Make a list of things that you can do, the ways you can celebrate yourself to enjoy this work 1% more every day. And then focus on that. We do not have to overhaul everything all at once. 1% every day, that is what changes the world. That is what changes you and then lets you go change the world. Because when enough of us are making this shift, when we create some industry-wide space for creativity instead of stress, we will have a much better chance of figuring out real solutions to these systemic issues. All right, that was maybe a bit of a rant, but hopefully you got something really useful out of it. Burnout is not just a you problem, but you can be part of your own solution. All right, until next time, writer friends, I wish you happy writing. If you enjoyed this podcast, then you've got to get on my email list. You'll get my best advice sent right to your inbox with concrete steps on how to stay in love with writing and banish burnout for good. Go to isabelsterling.com/join to sign up. When you do, you'll get one of my favorite worksheets, the 5 causes of writer's block. I teach you how to diagnose why you're stuck and how to get writing again. That's isabelsterling.com/join. See you next week.